I want to talk to you today about what Duncan asked, also to talk about the opportunities for employment and reduction of resource use. But I also want to talk about the challenges in that respect, because it's not as easy as the theory might suggest. So in order to briefly introduce, because you might not have heard of Copper8 or myself, Copper8 is, for lack of a better word, a consulting firm. We're based in Amsterdam, and we're very focused on implementing projects in the circular economy. We've been doing that for the past 11 years and for the past 6 years within the vehicle of Copper8. And we've done several projects in the construction industry. So for example, this is a project for 400 homes that was demolished and then rebuilt, 95% reuse of the demolished waste in the new buildings. That was done in 2008. We are involved with this project, basically running a tender. Like Bridget mentioned, procurement is a very strong tool to actually make sure that the market will also offer the supply that you're asking. 82% of materials were reused in that. And this is actually a 4-star hotel where we managed to reuse the facade of another building in Amsterdam within the first 7 floors of the structure. So we do a lot of work in the circular economy, but I think it's very important to also look at the 2 words of the circular economy, because one tends to focus a lot on the circular word, but I really believe that we need to also look at the economy word. And as Copper8, we want to be a pioneer in that as well. We think that every organization needs to change their business model in order to authentically contribute to the circular economy. And to be very honest, I think consultants really need to take their role as well. And we try to really change our business model in order to fit with the circular economy that we so believe in. And I can do a whole nother lecture on what we've all done, but we are a B Corp, we are a social enterprise. We really put these societal benefits over our profits. To move it on to the topic of today, I want to start with this graph, and I don't know if anyone recognizes this graph. But this was a study done in 1972, The Limits to Growth. It was published long before I was born by Donella Meadows and her team at MIT. And what she really did is she looked at the 5 major developments of our world, where she looked at population, she looked at industrial output, she looked at food, she looked at resource use and pollution. And there were a number of scenarios that were made, and the one that she thought was the most likely to occur was this one, where we would reach a point of overshoot and collapse in the 21st century. And these are all these inflection points that you see in the graphs where our economy is really going to change. Now you're probably asking, but how, if these projections were made in 1972, how are we actually doing? Now, I don't want to depress you, but these dotted lines are the projections that Donella Meadows made in 1972, and the fixed lines were actually done by the Melbourne Sustainability Institute in 2014 to project, how have we actually done according to these projections. Unfortunately, we're not very far off, so we still have a lot of work to do. Now, to tie that back into the topic of today, how do we look at resources, but also at this employment opportunity? I think it's really important to look at population growth. Of course, we all know we're going to be working towards a world of 10 billion people. We need to be employing them to actually give them the same amount of wealth that we in the Western world are used to living. But by doing that, there's also this tension, because we're going to be needing to use our resources to actually give them that amount of wealth. And I think it's important to then also look at the UN development goals, because when we look at these, you can kind of divide them up into 2 types of goals. So you have the gray ones that I've now marked gray. So these are the ones that really offer the social foundation for people who currently don't have our standard of living. And then we have these green environmental ones that are really focused on staying within these planetary boundaries that we have. But the interesting thing is that if we offer everyone the social foundation, we'll be using resources. So there's a real tension between these 2 types of sustainable development goals. Yet at the same time, I really believe that we can unite all these goals, but we really will need a different type of economy. And of course, it was already mentioned before that our resource growth is really coupled with our economic growth. And if you look at some studies that were done, for example, by UNEP, they say, the greatest drivers of material use are really population growth and wealth. And, some of you might say, but what about technology? What about innovation? Isn't that going to offset this population growth and also this growth in wealth? Well, I live with an innovator. My boyfriend used to work in technology, and I have this debate with him every single day. Now, luckily, I have UNEP to back me on this, who said, we have, of course, technology, but technology growth is not going to offset these increases in population and in wealth sufficiently to make sure that we can still live within our planetary boundaries. Moving on to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because I really do see that there are huge opportunities for employment in the circular economy. And of course, if we look at the butterfly, what we see now is that a lot of the activities, at least within the Netherlands, are very much focused on using recycled materials, so the most outer loop of the butterfly, for new resources. But what we really want to be doing is also using these sort of labor-intensive loops of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so refurbishing, remanufacturing, redistributing, maintaining products, in order to actually make sure that people are going to start making money on the circular economy. So this is the ideal situation. Of course, we want to create labor opportunities, but unfortunately, I have found that in practice, it's very difficult because we have incentives. We have created an economy that is very much based on the empty world where we were not living with 10 million people, the empty world where we really needed to make sure that we were taxing labor, for example. But we are now living in a full world where we need to start taxing fossil fuels. We need to start taxing the use of natural resources that are no longer free. And we really need to shift the taxation from labor to resources. But even more importantly is this formula. And I don't want to confuse you too much, but I do think it's important to make it very practical, because what I'm seeing a lot is that great circular initiatives are not actually becoming economically attractive. And it has to do with this formula. And don't worry, I'll run you through it. So very simple. We have profits, and profits are revenues minus costs. That's easy, right? But when we break down this formula, if we look at revenues, it's very difficult for circular alternatives to actually compete with new products. So if one needs to choose between the two, they're often going to choose for the new. So the revenues are going to be lower than in a linear world or for a linear product. Then if we look at the costs, you can pretty much say, and obviously this is a simplification, but we need to look at the costs of labor, which are often high because it's taxed at a higher level than resources. And we also need to look at the hours spent. Now, the interesting thing there is that because we haven't made our products in a circular way, if we're going to reuse components, it's going to take a lot of time to make new products with components that were not made to be disassembled or reused in the future. And of course, we also need to look at the costs of materials. If they are free, we don't have a problem. But if they are expensive because maybe we needed to store these products for a while, or maybe they weren't, these material streams didn't come free at a location which was very close to your location of production, you're going to have costs for the materials as well. And to make it very practical, I'm only going to use one example, this circular cycling. So I don't know if there's any cyclists in the room right now, but I myself do like to cycle. And it's actually a very interesting industry because the rate of innovation in racing bikes is huge. So every year there will be a lighter frame that'll make you go even faster, or you'll have a new gearbox that you absolutely must get, otherwise you will be uncool. And the interesting thing is that all these cycling shops, especially in the Netherlands, have lots of these latest innovations of 2015, 2016 up in their attics. So one of my friends said, well, why don't I use these frames and gearboxes and etc. to make new bikes from old bikes? And the interesting thing is that he actually found after a year, it's really difficult to make a bike from old materials that were not being reused, not being used. His price was almost as high as a new bike. And why was that? That was because he needed a lot of labor in order to assemble all these products that were not standardized to make a new bike. It was all about labor. So if we really want to accelerate the circular economy and create opportunities for employment, it's really important to really think at the incentive level, how are we going to make the circular economy more attractive? We need to rethink the way we make things. To put that onto the construction industry, if we look at a building, and this is one of Stuart Brand's, and he made this 25 years ago, he proposed that a building is not a building, but it's actually a combination of different layers that have different technical life cycles. And within each life cycle, within each layer, we will have a different circular design strategy in order to make sure that we can reuse components at a higher level than just the material level. But we really need systemic change. So yes, we can start redesigning our buildings, we can start using healthy materials, but we will also definitely need to look at a systemic level for change in order to accelerate opportunities so that we can actually create a social foundation and live within our planetary boundaries. I want to leave you with one quote that I find inspiring. Buckminster Fuller has a lot of them, but this is one of my favorites. We are the architects of the future, so I hope you will also be called to be one. Thank you.